Ancient mining is often remembered as a story of relentless toil. We picture figures in dark tunnels, armed with nothing but crude picks and flickering torches, engaged in a brutal struggle against the earth. This image is not entirely wrong, but it is profoundly incomplete. It misses the hidden chapters of ingenuity that transformed this work from mere labor into a sophisticated field of engineering. Archaeological discoveries are now revealing a startling truth. Long before the Industrial Age, miners employed advanced technologies that we have largely forgotten. They solved complex problems of geology, mechanics, and logistics with solutions that were both elegant and effective. By the end, you will see the ancient world not as a place of simple tools, but as a cradle of forgotten industrial genius. How did they shatter mountains without dynamite? What machines did they use to breathe life into the deepest, darkest pits? The answers reshape everything we thought we knew about pre-industrial innovation. What does it say about our own civilization when we discover that so much profound knowledge can simply slip through the cracks of time? The first and greatest obstacle was simply finding the prize. Ore deposits are not scattered evenly like gravel on a path. They are hidden veins, often buried deep within mountains or beneath layers of unremarkable stone. Ancient prospectors became masters of reading the landscape. They looked for subtle clues like the color of soil, the types of plants that grew in a particular area, or even mineral stains on exposed rock faces. A trickle of water carrying a faint metallic sheen could be a signpost pointing toward a fortune. This was not random digging. It was a sophisticated form of geological detective work, the essential first step in an immensely difficult process. Once a promising vein was identified, the real work began, and it presented a cascade of physical challenges that seem almost insurmountable without modern tools. The rock itself was the primary adversary. We are not talking about soft clay or loose sandstone. Miners sought the hardest materials like granite, quartzite, and dense metallic ores. A simple copper or flint pick would shatter against such stone. The act of penetrating this unyielding barrier was the first major puzzle to solve, but breaking the rock was only the beginning. Each strike of a tool created fragments, and those fragments had to be removed. In a shallow pit, you might haul baskets to the surface, but as the mine grew deeper, becoming a narrow shaft plunging straight down or a tunnel boring horizontally into a hillside, the logistics of removal became a monumental task. How do you move tons of crushed stone from depths of 100, 200, or even 300 feet, using only human and animal power? The environment within the mine then became a deadly enemy. As miners dug deeper, the air grew still and foul. The flickering flames of oil lamps would consume precious oxygen and could fill the tunnels with thick, choking smoke. Without a constant supply of fresh air, workers would simply collapse. Then there was water. Groundwater seeps into every excavation. In a deep mine, this could mean a constant cold trickle or a sudden catastrophic flood. Left unchecked, a productive tunnel could transform into a drowned tomb in a matter of days. Finally, the earth itself was always trying to reclaim its space. Tunnels and chambers needed to be held open against immense pressure from the surrounding rock. A collapse meant not only the loss of the excavation, but of every life inside it. Each of these problems, location, rock breaking, material removal, ventilation, water, and structural support, represents a critical branch of engineering. To believe that ancient people tackled large-scale, deep mining using only brute force is to misunderstand them completely. The solutions they devised were not just clever tricks. They were the foundational technologies of an entire industry, born from necessity and refined through generations of hard-won experience. The search for metal began not in the darkness of a tunnel, but under the open sky. Finding a surface nugget was a fortunate accident, but it was never the goal of a serious mining operation. That was merely a clue, a single breadcrumb on a much longer trail. To sustain a large-scale enterprise, ancient prospectors needed a reliable way to locate the mother lode, the rich vein from which those scattered pieces originated. They developed a systematic science of discovery, reading the landscape like a complex text written in stone, soil, and even plant life. One of their most trusted methods involved following the rust-colored stains known as gossans. When a vein of sulfide ore, like copper or iron, is exposed to air and water over centuries, it chemically weathers. This process creates a distinctive, often iron-rich cap of crumbling, brightly colored rock that can stain the soil for miles. A prospector seeing a vivid red or yellow band across a hillside understood it was not just pretty rock. It was a giant arrow pointing downward, a visible signpost left by nature that shouted, "Dig here." But the clues did not stop at the rocks themselves. Observant miners noticed that certain plants only thrived in soil with particular mineral content. A patch of small, hardy vegetation with blue-green leaves might indicate copper in the ground. Unusually stunted or strangely colored plant growth could signal the presence of other metals. This ancient practice, which we now call biogeochemical prospecting, meant the very ecosystem was giving away the secrets buried beneath it. Water, too, was a messenger. A clear stream bubbling from a hillside might carry a faint, metallic taste or leave a telltale, colorful residue on the stones in its bed. By tracing these streams back to their source, prospectors could often find the mineral vein that was leaching its essence into the water. We have written records of these sophisticated techniques. The Roman scholar Pliny the Elder, in his vast encyclopedia of natural knowledge, described how miners would search for cadmia, a zinc ore, by looking for the blackened, soot-like earth that formed above its deposits. He wrote of following silver veins by seeking out the red earth that accompanied them. These are not the notes of superstitious treasure hunters. They are the documented observations of a deliberate, empirical science. It was a process of deduction where every anomaly in the landscape was a potential piece of the puzzle. This systematic prospecting transformed mining from a game of chance into a calculated endeavor. It meant communities could plan, could invest labor and resources into a site with a reasonable expectation of return. Before a single pick was ever swung, the ancient prospector had already won a crucial victory, using the quiet language of the earth to ask and answer the most important question of all. Where do we begin? Once a promising vein was found, the next challenge was almost unimaginably hard. How do you break apart a mountain? The answer, for thousands of years, was not a sharper pick or a heavier hammer. It was fire. Across continents and millennia, from the flint mines of Neolithic Europe to the vast copper workings of the ancient world, miners mastered a technique of astonishing simplicity and raw power known as fire setting. The process was a deliberate, controlled act of violence against the stone. Workers would build a fierce, hot fire directly against the rock face they wanted to fracture. They used dry wood, often feeding the blaze for hours until the stone glowed with heat. Then, in a moment of dramatic transformation, they threw cold water, or sometimes sour vinegar, directly onto the superheated surface. This rapid cooling caused a phenomenon called thermal shock. The outer layer of rock, expanded by the heat, now contracted violently and instantaneously. This created immense internal stress, causing the rock to crack and explode in a shower of fragments, a process known as spalling. It was like watching stone itself shatter from the inside out. The effectiveness of this method is written in the Archaeology. In ancient mines from Great Britain to Jordan, tunnel walls are still coated in thick, black layers of soot, a permanent record of countless fires. The rock faces themselves show the distinctive scarring of thermal fracture, not the clean, sharp marks of chisels. This was the only way to efficiently attack the hardest, most valuable rocks like quartz, which would blunt or break metal tools in minutes. Fire setting was brutally effective, but it came at a steep human cost. The tunnels would fill with acrid, blinding smoke and unbearable heat. Miners often had to wait for days for the fumes to clear before they could re-enter and remove the shattered rock. It was a slow, dangerous, and grueling cycle. Yet it worked. This primordial technology unlocked materials that built civilizations. The beautiful, glossy flint that crafted Neolithic tools, the copper that ushered in the Bronze Age, the silver that funded empires, all were first freed from the earth by this clever manipulation of heat and cold. It was a stark demonstration of ancient engineering, using the fundamental forces of nature as a tool to accomplish what muscle alone never could. The shattering rock from fire setting created a new problem. Now you had a pile of sharp, heavy fragments that needed to be broken down further and sorted. This is where our modern image of the miner with a metal pick often fails us. For a very long time, and in many places, the primary tools of the trade were not made of iron or steel at all. They were crafted from materials that seem almost primitive by comparison, yet their design reveals a deep, practical intelligence. In the flint mines of what is now England, dating back over 4,000 years, the most common tools found are not metal. They are heavy, fist-sized mauls made from dense, durable stone like granite or limestone. These stones were carefully shaped, often with a groove carved around the middle to secure a handle with leather thongs. Think of them as the ancient world's sledgehammer. A miner would swing this stone maul to crush the larger, fire-loosened blocks into manageable pieces. Alongside these hammers, archaeologists find picks made from the strong, resilient antlers of red deer. The natural tines of the antler were perfect for prying and levering cracked rock apart. These organic tools were not a sign of poverty or lack of knowledge. They were a brilliant adaptation. Flint is incredibly hard, harder than early copper or bronze. A metal pick would bend, dull, or snap against it, while a stone maul would simply keep crushing, and an antler pick could absorb shock without breaking. The tool was chosen not by what was most advanced in a general sense, but by what was most effective for the specific task at hand. This principle of specialized design continued even as metal became more common. When bronze tools entered the mines, they were not simply copies of older stone implements. They were engineered for new functions. Bronze is strong but can be brittle under heavy impact. So instead of making giant bronze hammers, smiths often created durable bronze tips that could be fitted onto wooden handles, creating a pick that was lighter and could be used for precise prying in tight spaces. Different phases of the work demanded different tools. After the ore was hauled to the surface, the process of ore dressing began, separating the valuable mineral from the waste rock. This was often done with smaller, handheld stone hammers and grinding stones. The choice of material here was again deliberate. A stone hammer was perfect for pulverizing ore on a stone anvil, its rough surface providing more crushing power than a smooth metal face would. Every tool, from the massive stone maul to the delicate bronze chisel, tells a story of problem solving. It was a toolkit built through experience, where every material, stone, antler, wood, bronze, was understood for its specific properties of hardness, weight, flexibility, and durability. The ancient miner was not just a laborer swinging whatever was at hand. He was a technician, selecting the precise instrument needed to converse with the mountain, and his toolbox was far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. Breaking the rock into pieces was only half the battle. The real test of ingenuity came next, when miners faced massive, stubborn blocks that no hammer could move. This is where ancient engineering truly shined, not with complex machinery, but with a profound understanding of simple physics. they turned their greatest obstacle, the immense weight of the stone itself, into an ally. The key was the strategic use of three humble tools: the lever, the shim, and the wedge. Think of a massive slab of ore, cracked free by fire, setting but still clinging to the tunnel wall, or lying like a sleeping giant on the mine floor. Trying to lift or drag it directly was futile, so a miner would search for a natural point of weakness, a crack or a lip where he could insert a long, strong wooden pole. This was the lever. By placing a smaller stone as a fulcrum close to the block, he could apply force to the far end of the pole. The principle of mechanical advantage did the rest. With a steady push or pull, one person could generate enough force to tilt, shift, or completely overturn a stone that would otherwise require a dozen men to move. It was a silent multiplication of human strength, a fundamental law of physics put to work in the darkness. For tighter spaces or more precise work, they used shims and wedges. A shim was a thin piece of wood or stone, often tapered, that could be gently tapped into a hairline fracture. As it went deeper, the pressure it exerted would slowly, inexorably widen the crack. This gentle persuasion could coax a block away from its parent rock without shattering the valuable ore inside. The wedge, usually made of hardened bronze or later iron, was the more aggressive cousin. Driven into a prepared crack with a heavy stone maul, the wedge acted like a concentrated force of nature. Its sloping sides converted the downward hammer blow into a powerful outward pressure, forcing the rock to split along a desired plane. Archaeologists find these simple tools by the thousands in ancient mining sites. What is remarkable is not their existence, but the evidence of their systematic use. At the Bronze Age copper mines on the Great Orme in Wales, for example, researchers have found narrow, vertical grooves cut into tunnel walls. These were not natural. They were carefully made slots cut with stone tools, specifically designed to hold wooden wedges. Miners would line up a series of wedges in these slots, then strike them in sequence. The synchronized pressure would cleanly split off a perfect sheet of copper ore. This was not random bashing. It was a calculated extraction process, a form of prehistoric quarrying that maximized yield and minimized waste. This application of basic mechanics represents a quiet revolution. It marks the moment when mining stopped being solely about destruction and became about control. With a lever, a miner could direct where a ton of rock would fall. With a wedge, he could decide exactly how it would break. These tools transformed human effort, allowing small teams to achieve results that should have been impossible. They are a testament to a forgotten truth that some of the most advanced technology is not about creating new forces, but about understanding with perfect clarity how to guide the forces that already exist. But moving all that rock created another, more insidious problem. With every foot they dug downward, miners were inviting water into their workspace. A slow seep could become a steady stream, and a steady stream could become a catastrophic flood, halting work for months or drowning a mine entirely. The solution to this relentless enemy reveals one of the most startling leaps in ancient technology. Long before the great water wheels of medieval Europe powered grain mills, they were deployed in a far more demanding role, deep within the mountains of the Roman Empire. The geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century, described the silver mines of Roman Spain with a sense of awe. He wrote of enormous wheels turned by men treading on them, used to lift water from the mines in great quantities. These were not small devices. They were monumental pieces of engineering, sometimes arranged in series like a mechanical staircase for water. As one wheel lifted water from a sump at the bottom of a shaft, it would dump it into a channel that fed the next wheel higher up, and so on, until the water was finally expelled from the mine mouth. This was not simple bailing. This was a systematic, mechanical dewatering system, a precursor to the pump houses of the Industrial Revolution. The energy required was immense, supplied by teams of workers walking endlessly inside the wheels. a testament to the sheer value of the ore that justified such an exhausting operation. But the use of water power in mining may have gone even further. Archaeologists studying sites across the Roman world have found evidence suggesting some water wheels were not just for moving water, but for moving stone. At a site like Barbegal in southern France, the ruins of a massive Roman flour mill complex show an intricate understanding of geared water power. It is a short conceptual leap from using flowing water to turn millstones for grain, to using that same force to drive pounding hammers for crushing ore. While direct archaeological proof for ore-crushing water mills in antiquity is still debated, the engineering capability was undeniably present. The Romans had the gears, the water wheels, and the urgent need to process vast quantities of ore. The mental blueprint for mechanization was already fully formed. This changes the historical narrative in a profound way. We often place the birth of industrial-scale mechanization in the medieval period or later. But the evidence from these ancient mines suggests the seed was planted much earlier. It was a practical response to a specific, extreme problem: how to conquer the depths. The water wheel in the mine was more than a tool, it was a declaration. It announced that human ingenuity would not be limited by the strength of a back or the reach of an arm. It harnessed the power of rivers to fight the power of floods, using nature itself to defy nature's limits. This was not just early engineering, it was the dawn of an industrial mindset, hidden for centuries in the dark, wet silence of forgotten mine shafts. While the water wheel fought floods with raw mechanical power, another invention tackled the problem with elegant simplicity. It was a device so effective its basic design remains unchanged after more than 2,000 years: the Archimedes screw. At its heart, the principle is beautifully straightforward. Imagine a giant screw like those in a carpenter's workshop, but hollow and encased within a tight-fitting tube. When one end is placed in water and the screw is turned, the rotating spiral acts like a continuous, moving ramp. It scoops up a pocket of water at the bottom, lifts it up the incline as the screw turns, and pours it out the top. The genius is in its continuity. Unlike a bucket chain which lifts discrete amounts with pauses in between, the screw creates an unbroken, flowing stream of water. For a mine manager facing a constant seep, this was nothing short of revolutionary. It meant one or two men turning a crank could achieve what previously required a team of laborers with buckets, working in an exhausting, non-stop relay. The documented history of this device is fascinating. While famously associated with the Greek polymath Archimedes, historical accounts suggest he may have encountered it during his studies in Egypt, where similar devices had been used for centuries to lift water from the Nile for irrigation. This is a crucial point. It represents a classic pattern of technological evolution, a tool developed for one vital purpose, agriculture, being adapted to solve a different but equally critical industrial problem, mining. The transfer of this high-end engineering into the depths of a mine shaft speaks volumes about the interconnectedness of ancient innovation. It was not a technology born in isolation. It was a solution borrowed, improved, and applied where the need was most desperate. In a deep, narrow mining shaft, space was at a premium. The Archimedes screw was perfect. It could be built to fit the shaft, it was remarkably reliable with few moving parts to break, and it operated at a steady, manageable pace. The archaeological evidence, while subtle, points to its use. Roman-era mining sites, particularly in Spain and Britain, show features consistent with the installation of such drainage systems. More telling are the later, meticulous illustrations from the Renaissance, when engineers like Georgius Agricola documented mining practices that had been passed down for generations. His detailed woodcuts clearly show miners using hand-cranked Archimedes screws to dewater their operations, a direct link to a much older tradition. This simple screw embodies the pragmatic brilliance of ancient engineering. It required no advanced metallurgy or complex gears, just a profound understanding of geometry and motion. It turned the relentless problem of water from a crisis into a manageable flow, allowing miners to venture deeper and stay longer than ever before. In the darkness, the quiet turning of that screw was the sound of progress, a spiral of ingenuity lifting not just water, but the very ambitions of an industry out of the depths. The sheer scale of Roman ambition could not be contained within tunnels. When they sought gold in the rugged mountains of northwestern Spain, they did not simply dig into the landscape, they decided to dismantle it entirely. At a place called Las Médulas, they engineered one of the most audacious mining operations the ancient world ever witnessed, a process so vast it permanently reshaped the horizon. This was hydraulic mining known as hushing, and it transformed water from a tool for survival into a weapon of geological conquest. The Romans were not looking for deep veins here, but for alluvial gold, fine particles scattered within the soft sedimentary rock of the mountains. To extract it, they executed a plan of staggering complexity. First, they became master hydrologists. Teams of engineers mapped the surrounding mountains, tracing streams and calculating gradients. They then constructed a network of canals and aqueducts, some stretching over 60 miles, to capture and divert water from multiple rivers. This water was not sent directly to the mine. It was channeled into massive, strategically placed reservoirs carved into the higher slopes, creating an artificial lake district poised above the target. The operation then became a carefully timed event. Workers would dig a labyrinth of tunnels and galleries into the base of the gold-bearing mountain, deliberately weakening its internal structure. Then, with a signal, the sluice gates of the reservoirs were opened. A catastrophic torrent of water would thunder down the specially prepared channels and directly into the excavated network. The effect was instant and apocalyptic. The pressurized water exploded through the tunnels, fracturing the rock from within. Outside, the deluge washed away entire faces of the mountain in a roaring avalanche of mud, stone, and debris. This slurry, now containing the liberated gold, was funneled into a series of settling channels below. Here, the heavier gold particles would sink, while the lighter waste material was carried away by the continuing flow. What they left behind is a landscape that looks like the work of giants. Las Médulas today is a surreal, beautiful expanse of jagged red pinnacles and deep, smooth-cut valleys, a man-made badlands covering thousands of acres. It is the direct result of calculated environmental engineering. The scale is almost impossible to overstate. Historians estimate that over 500 million cubic feet of earth and rock were moved over 2 centuries of operation. This was not mining, it was terraforming. It required an army of laborers, a legion of engineers, and a bureaucratic system capable of planning and sustaining such a project for generations. The technology itself was simple, water and gravity, but its application was a masterpiece of systems thinking. It reveals a society that viewed the natural world not just as a resource to be harvested, but as a puzzle to be solved through large-scale, coordinated action. The silent, skeletal aqueducts leading to those empty reservoirs are a ghostly testament to a forgotten truth. Long before bulldozers and dynamite, human beings had already learned how to make mountains disappear. Yet, even with water conquered, the deepest mines held another silent, invisible threat. The very air could become a prison. As miners pushed further from the entrance, the natural flow of air would stall, growing still, heavy, and dangerously thin. Lamps would gutter out, not from lack of fuel, but from lack of oxygen. Without a constant exchange, the atmosphere would fill with the dust of shattered rock and the lingering smoke from fire setting, creating a toxic brew that could overcome a worker in minutes. Solving this was not a matter of strength, but of understanding an unseen force, the physics of airflow itself. The most elegant solution relied on pure geometry and natural law. When miners dug 2 shafts down to the same underground gallery, they unintentionally created a simple but powerful machine. Even a slight difference in the height or surface temperature of the 2 openings would start a convection current. Warm air rising from the depths or from workers' bodies would flow up one shaft, pulling cool, fresh air down the other in a continuous, self-sustaining cycle. This was ventilation engineered directly into the architecture of the mine, a passive system that breathed for itself. For single shaft operations, the solutions became more active and ingenious. At the surface, teams might operate large bellows or fabric sails, manually pumping air down the narrow passage like blowing through a long straw. There is also evidence from later periods, supported by folklore and early technical manuscripts, of a more dramatic method. A carefully controlled fire would be lit at the base of a ventilation shaft or in a special side chamber. The heat from this fire would cause the air around it to expand rapidly and rise, creating a powerful updraft that pulled fresh air through the connected tunnels. This was a dangerous balance, using the tool that once choked the tunnels to now clear them, a testament to the miners' nuanced control of their environment. These were not random experiments. They demonstrate a working knowledge of principles we now call pressure differentials and thermal convection. The miners may not have had the scientific vocabulary, but they possessed the practical wisdom. They knew that air moves from high pressure to low, that heat makes it rise, and that you could harness these truths to engineer a breathable space hundreds of feet below ground. This understanding was what allowed large workforces to operate in shifts deep within the earth. It turned a potential tomb into a workplace. Every gasp of fresh air in those dark galleries was a victory of intellect over instinct, a silent partnership with the atmosphere that made the difference between a futile scratch at the surface and the true conquest of the deep. The deepest tunnels held a constant, crushing threat, the immense weight of the mountain itself. To venture further, miners had to perform a delicate act of negotiation with the earth, convincing it to hold its shape long enough for them to pass. This was the art of shoring and timbering, a forgotten discipline of underground architecture that turned chaotic voids into stable, long-lasting workspaces. It required more than just propping up a roof. It demanded a sophisticated understanding of how forces move through stone and wood. In the ancient salt mines of Hallstatt, high in the Austrian Alps, the darkness has preserved a masterclass in this engineering. Here, miners over 2,500 years ago constructed intricate frameworks of timber that look less like crude supports and more like the internal skeleton of a building. They used a technique called cribbing, interlocking logs at right angles to create stacked hollow boxes. These boxes were then filled with waste rock, creating solid, immovable pillars that distributed the overhead weight down to the solid floor. It was a way of building artificial bedrock, a permanent column of stability within the shifting, salt-rich earth. But the innovation did not stop at static posts. The Hallstatt miners engineered complete timber roadways, wooden rails that allowed sledges loaded with salt to be pulled smoothly through the tunnels. They built sturdy staircases descending between levels, and even crafted elaborate wooden chutes to send material quickly from upper galleries to lower collection points. Every beam was meticulously shaped with bronze axes and adzes, each joint carefully fitted. This was not emergency bracing thrown up in a panic. It was planned, permanent infrastructure. It speaks to a profound knowledge of static loads, the way weight presses down and pushes out. They understood that a tunnel is not just a hole, it is an architectural space under perpetual siege by pressure. By creating a flexible, wooden lattice that could absorb slight shifts and settle without snapping, they gave the mountain a structure it could lean on. This allowed them to carve out vast chambers and multi-level complexes, safe in the knowledge that their ceiling would not become their tomb. The sheer volume of wood used is staggering. Entire forests were harvested and hauled up the mountain to feed the mines below. This represents an enormous logistical operation in itself, a supply chain dedicated solely to safety. The preserved wood at Hallstatt gives us an exact calendar of this work, tree ring dating revealing not just the year a support was cut, but even the season, showing this was a continuous, year-round enterprise. This silent forest growing in the dark is perhaps the clearest evidence we have of the ancient miners' mindset. They were not reckless adventurers gambling with the deep. They were calculated engineers, investing immense time and resources into making the impossible merely difficult and the deeply dangerous manageably safe. Their timber frames held up more than just rock, they held up the very possibility of progress. Yet all this effort, the fire setting, the levering, the hauling, was for nothing if the rock that finally reached the surface contained only a whisper of metal. A mountain of low-grade ore was a monument to wasted labor. This is why the final, and perhaps most underappreciated, technological leap happened not in the dark but in the open air. It was the art of ore dressing, a meticulous process of separation that turned raw, unremarkable stone into a concentrated, valuable commodity. The principle was simple, but the execution demanded patience and skill. The miner's goal was to liberate the tiny, often microscopic, grains of metal from their rocky prison, and then to gather those grains together. The first step was size reduction. Using heavy stone hammers on large stone anvils, workers would break the ore into smaller and smaller pieces. This was often women's and children's work, a family enterprise where every capable hand contributed. The resulting gravel would then be ground even finer, sometimes using rotary querns, the same basic tool used for milling grain. This relentless pulverization was not random violence. It was a necessary prelude, creating a mixture where the dense metal particles and the lighter waste rock, called gangue, could finally be parted ways. And for that, ancient engineers turned once more to their most versatile ally, water. They mastered gravity separation, using flowing water as a gentle but irresistible judge. One of the most common devices was the simple sluice box, a long, slightly inclined wooden channel. As water was directed down the channel, workers would shovel the crushed ore mixture into the flow. The water carried the lighter gangue particles away, while the heavier metal grains, like gold or tin, would settle out and catch in carefully placed ridges or a blanket of rough fabric on the bottom of the sluice. It was a continuous, flowing filter. For finer materials, they used more sophisticated devices like the buddle, a shallow, circular pit with a central post. Crushed ore slurry was fed onto the buddle, and a worker would keep it in motion with a paddle. As the slurry swirled, centrifugal force and gravity would again do their work, driving the heavy concentrates to the outer edge while the lighter tailings collected near the center to be washed away. The efficiency of these systems was astounding. At the Bronze Age copper mines on the Great Orme, analysis of the vast waste heaps, called tailings, shows that the miners were achieving a concentration rate of over 80% metal from the original rock. They were leaving behind almost pure, clean waste. This level of efficiency was not accidental. It was the product of refined, generations-old technique. It transformed the economics of ancient mining. A small, rich concentrate was worth infinitely more than a mountain of poor ore, because it drastically reduced the cost and danger of the next steps, the smelting and transport. The silent, sunlit work of the ore dressing floor was where the real value was created. Here, with flowing water and patient observation, the ancient miner completed the conversation with the mountain, taking the gift it had given in confusion and answering with the clarity of pure, concentrated intent. The final step of liberation demanded a new kind of force. All the careful sorting and washing could only work if the ore was crushed fine enough, a task that exhausted human arms and limited the scale of everything that followed. The solution to this bottleneck was not just a better tool, but the first true machine of the mining industry, the stamp mill. Imagine a row of massive wooden hammers, each weighing hundreds of pounds, lifted by a rotating camshaft and then dropped in a relentless, rhythmic cadence onto ore placed on a stone anvil below. This was not human strength amplified, it was human strength replaced by mechanical power, and its origins reach back far earlier than we once believed. While the fully realized water-powered stamp mills of medieval Europe are famous, their conceptual blueprint was drawn centuries before. The Greek historian Agatharchides, writing in the 2nd century before the Common Era, described gold mining operations in Egypt with startling detail. He wrote of ore being crushed not by hand, but by great pestles in large mortars, a process he notes was so demanding it was often the work of those facing hardship. This is more than a description of hard labor, it is a clear account of an early, large-scale crushing installation, a precursor where the basic principle of the stamp, a heavy weight dropped vertically, was already in organized use. The Romans, with their genius for systematization, likely advanced this concept further. At mining sites across their empire, archaeologists have found large, circular stone basins with central pivots, alongside heavy stone or iron pounders. These are not simple mortars, they are the components of what scholars call the trip hammer or trapetum, a machine often used for crushing olives, but ingeniously adapted for crushing ore. Powered by donkeys or water, these rotating arms would lift and drop heavy pounders in a continuous cycle. It was a direct mechanical ancestor to the medieval stamp battery. The progression is clear from the manual pestles described by Agatharchides, to the animal or water-powered Roman trip hammers, to the towering, multi-stamp mills of the later medieval period that could pulverize tons of rock in a day. This evolution reveals a continuous thread of innovation aimed at one goal: breaking nature's materials down to a point where human ingenuity could finally take over. The stamp mill represents a critical threshold in technological history. It marks the moment when mining truly became an industrial process, decoupled from the limits of muscle and stamina. The relentless, earth-shaking thud of those falling stamps was the sound of the ancient world building the foundation for everything that would come after, a mechanical heartbeat echoing from the depths of history. But the stamp mill was not the end of the line. It was the gateway to the final, fiery transformation, the moment when earth became metal. Every technological leap in the mines, from fire setting to water-powered crushing, served a single, overarching purpose: to deliver a concentrated product to the smelter as efficiently as possible. This reveals a crucial truth often overlooked: ancient mining and metallurgy were not separate crafts. They were two halves of a single, integrated industrial system, and the miner's work in the dark directly dictated the smelter's needs in the light. After the ore was crushed and washed, it underwent one more vital preparation, often right at the mine site. For sulfide ores, which are common for copper and lead, this meant roasting. Workers would pile the concentrated ore into large, open hearths and burn it for hours or even days. This wasn't smelting, it was a chemical pre-treatment. The sustained heat drove off sulfur and other volatile elements, transforming the dense, stubborn sulfide into a more porous, reactive oxide. This step was absolutely critical. Trying to smelt raw sulfide ore was far less efficient, requiring more fuel and yielding far less pure metal. By roasting the ore first, miners were essentially pre-cooking the raw material, making the smelter's job dramatically easier and more successful. This practice highlights a sophisticated understanding of logistics and economics. Roasting, like crushing, significantly reduced the weight of the material that needed to be transported. You were not hauling mountains of raw rock to a distant smelting center. You were shipping compact, high-grade concentrate. This was a calculated decision that saved immense labor, time, and cost. It meant smelting operations could be centralized near forests for charcoal fuel, rather than being forced to operate at every remote mining site. the entire chain, from prospecting to roasting, was designed to maximize value at every step and minimize waste in movement. The miner, therefore, was not just an excavator, he was the first stage in a precise chemical process. The quality of his sorting, the fineness of his crushing, and the completeness of his roasting determined everything that followed. A poorly prepared ore would waste days of a smelter's time and consume vast amounts of precious fuel for a meager yield. The economic pressure for perfect preparation was immense, and it was this pressure that drove the relentless innovation in mining technology we've been exploring. The water wheel, the Archimedes screw, the stamp mill, all these were not just about moving deeper or moving faster. They were about producing a better, more consistent raw material for the transformative fire that waited at the journey's end. The true product of the ancient mine was not rough stone, but potential, carefully packaged and ready for its final, brilliant release. The silent, steady thud of the stamp mill was just one sound in a much larger symphony of movement. For every ton of valuable concentrate produced, many more tons of waste rock, water, and supplies had to be precisely managed in a confined, chaotic space hundreds of feet underground. The true measure of an ancient mine's sophistication was not found in any single tool, but in its hidden circulatory system, the vast, forgotten logistics that kept the entire operation alive. This was the realm of ropes, rails, and relentless organization. Before a single coin could be minted from Athenian silver, an army of laborers had to solve a simple but monumental puzzle. How do you move mountains of material, both precious and worthless, through a twisting, pitch-black labyrinth and do it day after day for centuries? The answer was infrastructure on an industrial scale. In the legendary silver mines of Laurion near Athens, the evidence of this hidden network is etched into the stone itself. The tunnels here are not rough-hewn caves. Many have smooth, flat floors, and running along them are parallel grooves worn deep by generations of use. These are the tracks for wooden mine carts, small, sturdy wagons, likely pushed by hand or pulled by donkeys, would run on these wooden rails, transporting ore from the active face to the central shafts with an efficiency that brute force carrying could never match. It was an underground railway, a system that turned a chaotic haul into a scheduled shuttle service, but the vertical dimension presented the greatest challenge. Getting ore, waste, and most critically, miners themselves up and down deep shafts required another leap of engineering. This is where the Whims, or winding engines, came into play. A whim was a massive horizontal capstan, a drum turned by men or animals walking in a constant circle. Thick ropes woven from hemp or leather would wind around this drum, descending into the main shaft. Attached to these ropes were large buckets or platforms. With a team of workers or oxen providing the motive power, the whim could hoist incredible weights from the depths. It was the elevator and the freight lift of the ancient world, a mechanical muscle that conquered gravity itself. The organization of labor behind these machines was equally complex. Mining was a segmented, specialized operation. Teams of hewers worked at the rock face. Barrow men and cart pushers handled transport. The strongest laborers often worked the whims, their endless circular walk a testament to grueling, coordinated effort. Then there were the sorters, often children or the elderly, who would perform the initial separation of ore from waste rock right at the shaft head, ensuring only valuable material moved onto the crushing floors. This division of labor was not arbitrary. It was a production line engineered for maximum throughput. Every role was interdependent. A delay at the whim would back up the carts. A bottleneck at the sorting area would stall the hewers. The smooth operation of the mine depended on each cog in this human machine turning in sync. Water, too, had its own dedicated logistics. The same whims that lifted ore would also lift endless buckets of water from the sump pits. In larger mines, separate drainage adits, long, gently sloping tunnels dug specifically to intersect the main workings would channel water out by gravity alone, a permanent solution to a perpetual problem. The scale at Laurion is breathtaking. Over 2,000 separate shafts have been identified, connected by 150 miles of tunnels. The silver extracted here funded the Athenian navy, the very fleet that saved Greek democracy at the Battle of Salamis. That victory was won not just by triremes and warriors, but by the silent, coordinated effort of thousands of anonymous workers moving through the dark, their world defined by ropes, rails, and rhythm. This hidden network reveals the ultimate truth of ancient mining. The brilliance was not in a single flash of invention, but in the sustained, systematic execution of 1,000 mundane tasks. It was a symphony of logistics conducted in darkness that echoed through history. But all this coordinated effort would have descended into chaos without a map. In the absolute blackness of a deep mine, where a single wrong turn could lead to a dead end or a fatal collapse, ancient miners performed a quiet miracle of precision. They learned to see in the dark, not with their eyes but with geometry. The tunnels that snake through mountains like Laurion or Hallstatt are not the random burrowings of desperate men. They follow the ore veins with a deliberate, almost surgical intent, and this required a forgotten science of underground navigation. Without compasses, theodolites, or laser guides, they relied on the most fundamental tools of alignment, the plumb line and the water level. A plumb line is simply a weight on a string, but in a miner's hands it became a vertical truth teller. By suspending this line, they could ensure their shafts plunged straight down, or that the walls of a gallery were perfectly upright. For determining a level or a gentle, consistent slope for drainage, they used water. A simple, narrow trough of water, or even two connected vessels, would always find a level surface. By sighting along this liquid horizon, miners could maintain a tunnel's gradient for hundreds of feet, ensuring it would meet another shaft exactly as planned. The proof of this meticulous work is etched into the rock itself. In mines across Europe, archaeologists find carefully chiseled marks, guide notches, and reference lines on tunnel walls and ceilings. These are not accidental scratches. They are the surveyor's benchmarks, permanent points from which measurements were taken and directions were set. They allowed different teams, working from different entrances or on different levels, to coordinate their digging without breaking into each other's workspaces. The avoidance of tunnel collisions is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for advanced planning. In complex multi-level mines, upper and lower galleries often run in parallel, following the same ore seam but separated by a safe thickness of rock. This was not luck, this was calculation. It implies that someone, a master miner or an overseer, was working from a mental or even a simple physical model of the entire system. They understood the concept of depth and parallax, of maintaining a measured distance between excavations. This level of coordination speaks to a hierarchical, organized industry. There were planners and there were diggers. The planners used simple tools to solve complex spatial problems, ensuring that the immense effort of extraction was not wasted in confusion. They were drafting in stone, their map not drawn on parchment, but carved directly into the living rock, a three-dimensional blueprint of pursuit and patience. This invisible framework of lines and levels is the silent genius behind the mine's chaos. It is the reason these dark worlds functioned not as tombs, but as engines of industry, where every team in every tunnel knew precisely where they were, and more importantly, where they were going. Yet this entire world of measurement and motion existed in near total darkness. The miner's most intimate companion was not his pick, but his light. In the absolute black of a deep tunnel, a flickering flame was more than illumination. It was the thin line between productive work and paralyzing fear, between a safe step and a fatal plunge. The evolution of this simple tool reveals a quiet revolution in safety and efficiency, a story written in smoke and clay. For millennia, the most basic solution was the torch, a bundle of resinous wood or rags soaked in animal fat. Its light was dramatic, casting long, dancing shadows that brought the rough-hewn walls to life. But in the confined space of a mine, a torch was a dangerous friend. It consumed oxygen at a voracious rate, competing with the miners for every breath in the already stagnant air. Worse, it produced thick, choking smoke that would pool along the ceiling, reducing visibility to a hazy gloom and leaving a layer of black soot on everything it touched. A tunnel lit by torches was a place of limited endurance where the air itself became an enemy as the hours wore on. The breakthrough came with a shift from an open flame to a contained one. The Roman lucerna, a simple clay oil lamp, was a masterpiece of pragmatic design. Shaped like a shallow dish with a central filling hole and a pinched spout for a wick, it was cheap, durable, and transformative. By enclosing the flame and feeding it with a slow-burning oil like olive oil or animal fat, the lucerna solved the twin problems of the torch. It produced far less smoke, and its controlled burn used oxygen more sparingly, allowing work to continue for longer stretches without the air becoming toxic. The lamp's shape was its genius. It could be set down on a ledge, hung from a hook driven into the wall, or even carried in one hand while leaving the other free. Archaeologists find these lamps by the hundreds in ancient mine sites, their clay bodies often blackened from use, a silent testament to countless shifts spent in their gentle, steady glow. This was not merely a change in equipment, it was a fundamental improvement in the quality of the work environment. Better light meant fewer accidents, less eye strain, and the ability to see subtle color variations in the ore vein, allowing for more precise extraction. The enclosed lamp extended the possible workday in the depths, turning a place of shadow into a space of sustained, focused labor. It represents a profound understanding that true productivity depends not just on powerful tools, but on the basic conditions that allow human skill to function. The humble clay lamp, often overlooked, was a beacon of progress in the dark, proving that sometimes the smallest innovations cast the longest light. But the most complex machine in the ancient mine had no moving parts made of wood or bronze. It was the human society that operated it. The physical technologies we have explored, the water wheels and screws and stamp mills, were only as effective as the social technology that surrounded them. This was an intricate engine of organization, a system of specialized roles, strict hierarchies, and complex economics that mobilized thousands of individuals toward a single, monumental goal. Without this social framework, the greatest engineering would have remained a curiosity, lost in the chaos of uncoordinated effort. The division of labor was astonishingly precise. It began with the hewers, the elite frontline workers who actually attacked the rock face. Their skill determined the pace of the entire operation. Supporting them were the barrowmen and cart pushers, the logistics corps who cleared the debris and kept the tunnels from clogging. Then came the carpenters, a critical and highly skilled group who maintained the timber supports, built the rails, and repaired the Whims. Blacksmiths and tool makers worked in forges near the mine mouth, constantly sharpening picks, forging new wedges, and fabricating metal parts for the machinery. Above ground, another army took over. Sorters, often women and children, performed the initial separation of ore from waste. Crushers and washers operated the grinding stones and sluice boxes. Roasters tended the furnaces that prepared the ore for smelting. This was not a loose collection of laborers. It was a coordinated production line where a delay in one specialty would ripple through and stall the entire chain. Managing this human machine required a clear hierarchy. Inscriptions and records from places like Laurion reveal a structured world of overseers, foremen, and accountants. A chief engineer or mining captain would have overall responsibility. making strategic decisions about where to dig next and how to allocate resources. Under him, shift bosses would supervise the daily work in specific sections, ensuring safety protocols were followed and quotas were met. Scribes kept meticulous records of output, tool distribution, and worker rations. This bureaucracy was essential for an operation that could employ 10,000 people or more. It turned a sprawling, dangerous endeavor into a measurable, manageable enterprise. The economic systems that powered this engine varied widely. Some mines, like those of Imperial Rome in Spain, were state-run enterprises directly controlled by the government and often worked by individuals facing hardship or by conscripted labor. Others operated on a lease system. At Laurion, the Athenian state owned the mineral rights but leased individual mining concessions to wealthy citizens. These lessees would then hire free workers, often skilled metics or resident foreigners, paying them wages from the profits. This system incentivized efficiency, as a lessee's fortune depended on extracting as much silver as possible at the lowest cost. It also created a vibrant, competitive mining economy. The darkest facet of this social engine, present in many but not all ancient mining contexts, was the use of enslaved labor. For the most dangerous and exhausting tasks, particularly in Roman mines under the Empire, large numbers of enslaved individuals were often forced to work. Their existence within this system represents a profound moral contradiction, a pinnacle of human organizational genius built upon profound human suffering. This social machinery, in all its forms, was the true catalyst. It was the system that could plan a 60-mile aqueduct for hydraulic mining, coordinate the felling of entire forests for timber supports, and ensure that the man turning the Archimedes screw and the woman sorting ore at the surface were part of the same relentless, purposeful rhythm. The pick broke the rock, but it was the organizational chart that broke the mountain. This sophisticated knowledge did not reside in textbooks or universities. It lived in the hands and minds of the miners themselves, passed down through generations in a fragile chain of mentorship and memory. The primary vehicle for this transmission was the oral tradition, a living library of technique where every seasoned miner was a librarian. A young apprentice would learn not by reading manuals, but by watching, listening, and doing, standing beside a master for years. He would memorize the specific sound a pick made when it struck paid dirt versus barren rock. He would learn the feel of a timber beam that was bearing too much weight, and the exact color of smoke from a roasting pile that signaled the process was complete. This was tacit knowledge, impossible to fully capture in words, embedded in the senses and refined through a lifetime of experience. To protect this valuable expertise and maintain standards, miners often formed close-knit, guild-like associations. These were not always formal unions, but powerful social bonds. They controlled access to the trade, regulated apprenticeships, and safeguarded the community's secrets. The techniques for finding a vein, for building a safe timber frame, or for operating a complex whim were proprietary information, a collective inheritance that gave a mining community its identity and its economic edge. This system was remarkably effective for continuity, but it carried a profound vulnerability. The entire edifice of mining technology rested not on durable records, but on the uninterrupted flow of human conversation and practice. When that flow was broken, the knowledge could evaporate in a single generation. Technological regression was a recurring shadow in the ancient and medieval world, and it rarely happened because someone invented a better way. More often, it occurred because the societal structures that sustained the old ways fell apart. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire is the most dramatic example. The vast state-organized mining districts in Spain, Britain, and the Balkans relied on imperial administration, long-distance trade networks, and a centralized military to protect them. When that framework disintegrated in the 5th century, the intricate systems faltered. The engineers who managed the aqueducts for hydraulic mining were gone. The bureaucrats who coordinated the shipment of tools and food vanished. The specialized smelting centers lost their supply chains. In the ensuing chaos and localization of power, large-scale, deep shaft mining became impossible to sustain. The knowledge of how to dewater a 300-foot shaft or how to construct a series of water-lifting wheels simply faded from common use because the problems they solved were no longer being tackled on that scale. Communities retreated to simpler, surface-level panning and shallow pit mining, techniques that required less coordination and infrastructure. The techniques themselves did not become impossible to understand. They became irrelevant to a fractured, impoverished world. Economic shifts could cause a similar erosion. If a major silver mine was exhausted, the specialized community that worked it would disperse, taking their hard-won, site-specific knowledge with them. That knowledge might not translate to a different mineral or a different geology elsewhere. Furthermore, a decline in demand for a particular metal, perhaps due to changing trade routes or political turmoil, could make the advanced techniques for extracting it economically pointless. Why maintain the arduous practice of fire setting for copper if nobody is buying copper? The skill would atrophy from disuse. This pattern reveals a humbling truth about human progress. Advancement is not a steady, inevitable climb. It is a fragile garden requiring constant tending by a stable society. The forgotten technologies of ancient mining were not stupidly abandoned. They were casualties of a world that could no longer support the complex, interconnected systems they depended on. The silence that fell in those deep tunnels was not the silence of ignorance, but the echo of a broken conversation. The story of forgotten mining technology finds its most complete expression in one extraordinary place. For over 5,000 years, the red-stained hills of Rio Tinto in southwestern Spain have been a stage for industrial innovation, where each new culture built upon the engineering of the last. This single site offers a tangible timeline, a layered archaeological record where we can see the abstract principles of ancient mining made spectacularly real. The journey begins with the mysterious Tartessians, a wealthy local civilization mentioned in the Bible, who first tapped the surface deposits. They were followed by the seafaring Phoenicians, master traders who recognized the site's immense value and expanded the operations. Finally, the Romans arrived, and with their imperial-scale ambition, they transformed Rio Tinto into one of the largest industrial complexes the ancient world had ever seen. The evidence they left behind is not just in the tunnels but in the very shape of the landscape. The most immediate clue to the site's past is visual, and it comes from space. Satellite images of the Rio Tinto region reveal a startling, otherworldly palette of deep reds, vibrant yellows, and stark whites. These are not natural soil colors. They are the chemical fingerprints of millennia of mining activity, the result of acid mine drainage and oxidized metals leaching into the earth. This colorful pollution is a permanent scar, but also a historical record, marking the vast extent of the ancient workings. On the ground, the scale becomes almost incomprehensible. The Romans alone left behind slag heaps containing over 6 million tons of processed waste material. To put that in perspective, that is enough debris to fill a line of dump trucks stretching from Madrid to Moscow. Each of those slag piles represents ore that was mined, crushed, roasted, and smelted, a mountain of discarded stone that testifies to a mountain of extracted metal. This was not a seasonal camp, it was a permanent, roaring engine of industry. The technological progression is written into the rock itself. Early Tartessian and Phoenician work focused on open cast mining, following rich veins visible at the surface. But as those were exhausted, the pursuit went deeper. The Romans inherited these initial pits and shafts, and then they applied their signature systematic engineering. They constructed vast networks of aqueducts to bring water for hydraulic mining and ore processing, some channels stretching for dozens of miles across rugged terrain. Within the mountains, they engineered a breathtaking solution to the deadliest problem of deep mining: ventilation. At Rio Tinto, archaeologists have uncovered a masterpiece of subterranean design, a ventilation shaft known as the Zaranda's Nuva system. This was not a simple hole. It was a complex, multi-level structure that connected different galleries to create a controlled airflow circuit. By understanding how air moved with temperature changes, the Roman engineers created a natural draft that pulled fresh air through the active workings and expelled foul air up specific shafts. This allowed them to mine at depths previously thought impossible for the ancient world, reaching down nearly 300 feet in some areas. The infrastructure above ground was equally advanced. The remains of enormous water tanks and settling ponds outline a sophisticated ore dressing plant. Water from the aqueducts would be channeled through a series of these ponds where crushed ore was washed and separated. The heavier copper and silver particles would settle, while the lighter waste was carried away. This continuous process allowed for the handling of staggering volumes of material, turning raw ore into concentrated product with relentless efficiency. Perhaps the most telling synthesis of technology at Rio Tinto is found in the tools and the trash. In the lower, older levels of the mines, archaeologists find stone hammers and bone tools, the classic toolkit of pre-metal mining. Higher up in the Roman layers, those are replaced by iron picks, wedges, and chisels, alongside countless fragments of the clay oil lamps that illuminated the deep galleries. The pottery shards, the discarded sandals, the wooden supports preserved in the acidic water, all these fragments coalesce into a vivid picture of a bustling, multi-ethnic community of engineers, metalworkers, laborers, and overseers. Rio Tinto is more than a mine. It is a 5,000-year conversation with the earth, a physical manuscript where each chapter is written in a different language of engineering. It shows us that technological advancement in antiquity was rarely a sudden invention, but most often a slow, deliberate accumulation, where each generation stood on the shoulders and in the tunnels of the one before. While the Romans orchestrated industrial symphonies, another ancient civilization was solving the same fundamental problems in a landscape of utter desolation. Far to the east, in the stark, sun-blasted mountains of the Sinai Peninsula, Egyptian expeditions pursued a different treasure, not silver or copper, but the celestial blue stone of turquoise. At a remote site called Serabit el-Khadim, they established mining operations that ran for nearly 2,000 years, and here, the universal principles of ancient engineering were adapted to one of the most punishing environments on Earth. This was not a permanent city, but a seasonal, sacred industrial outpost, and its ruins tell a story of extreme adaptation. The primary goal was religious and ceremonial, to extract the sacred turquoise used for the jewelry of gods and pharaohs, and this spiritual imperative demanded solutions just as ingenious as any Roman economic venture. The first challenge was the rock itself. The turquoise veins were embedded within a hard sandstone matrix, and here, in the dry desert air, the Egyptians employed the same global technology of fire setting. Archaeologists have found the unmistakable evidence: walls blackened by soot and rock faces scarred by thermal shock. They would build their fires against the stone, then douse them with water carried at great effort to the site, spalling the rock to access the precious blue seams within. But their tools reflected local pragmatism. While they had access to copper, the site is littered not with metal picks but with countless stone tools. This was a deliberate choice. They established dedicated tool-making workshops right at the mine, where workers would craft hundreds of heavy stone mauls and hammer stones from the local granite. Why use stone when copper was available? The answer is one of pure logistics and material science. Copper tools dull and break quickly against hard sandstone, requiring constant repair and a steady supply of metal from the Nile Valley, hundreds of miles away. Stone hammers, however, could be made on site from an inexhaustible local resource. When one broke, you simply made another. It was a brilliantly sustainable loop, minimizing dependence on a fragile supply chain. Water management in this desert context became an art form of survival and industry. There are no rivers at Serabit el-Khadim, only rare winter rains. The Egyptians became masters of capture and conservation. They carved out elaborate systems of cisterns and catchment basins in the bedrock, designed to channel every precious drop of rainfall into storage. This water was not primarily for drinking, it was the lifeblood of the mining process itself, used for the critical fire-setting dousing and for the subsequent ore dressing. After the turquoise-bearing rock was broken up, workers would crush it with those stone hammers, then use the carefully hoarded water to wash the powder across stone slabs. The lighter waste sand would wash away, leaving the heavier, beautiful blue fragments behind. Every drop was measured, every use was calculated. This was hydraulic engineering turned inward, a closed system in the open desert. All of this, however, hinged on the most daunting challenge of all, logistics. Serabit el-Khadim was over 100 miles from the nearest permanent settlement in Egypt, across a brutal wilderness of sand and mountain. Supplying a camp of hundreds of miners, artisans, and soldiers for months-long expeditions was a monumental feat of organization. Inscriptions at the site detail the caravans, the donkeys laden with grain, beer, pottery, and luxury goods for the officials. They also describe the human cost, with records of expeditions sometimes not returning, lost to the harsh desert. The Egyptians built a temple at the site, dedicated to the goddess Hathor, the Lady of Turquoise. This was not an afterthought, it was the central pillar of the operation. The temple provided spiritual protection, moral authority, and a bureaucratic center where records were kept and orders were given. It transformed a remote mining camp into a sacred extension of the Egyptian state, a piece of home planted in the wilderness to sustain the workers' spirits and ensure their loyalty. The story of Serabit el-Khadim provides a powerful contrast to the Roman mega-projects. Here, advanced technologies were not scaled up for overwhelming volume, but scaled down for perfect, resilient efficiency. They adapted the global tool of fire setting to a water-starved environment. They chose locally sourced stone tools over imported metal to ensure independence. They engineered water systems that functioned not on abundance but on meticulous conservation. This remote blue stone quarry proves that the core genius of ancient mining was not about a specific culture or a particular resource. It was an adaptable mindset, a toolkit of principles that could be reconfigured for any landscape, any material, and any scale, from an empire's silver artery to a desert pilgrimage for sacred stone. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire did not plunge the world into 1,000 years of technological silence. The knowledge of mining did not vanish, it fragmented and flowed into new channels, finding refuge in the places where the work never truly stopped. To understand what was forgotten, we must first see what was tenaciously remembered. In the dense, ore-rich mountains of the Harz region in central Germany, a continuous thread of practice connects the early medieval period back to Roman methods. Here, mining was a local necessity, not an imperial project, and the community itself became the living library. The simple, brilliant tools, the lever, the wedge, the hammer, never fell out of use. They were too fundamental, too effective to be abandoned. The art of timber framing for support, the careful surveying using plumb lines, the basic principles of ventilation by connecting shafts, these were not rediscovered in the Renaissance. They were passed from master to apprentice in an unbroken chain through the so-called Dark Ages. The survival of this core, practical knowledge in places like the Harz proves a vital point. When a society has a direct, ongoing need for a resource, the essential technologies to extract it will endure. They become embedded in the culture, a part of its identity and survival. What faded was not the craft itself, but the scale and the systemic complexity that the Roman imperial engine had enabled. The genuine losses were the grand, infrastructure-heavy technologies that required centralized power, vast capital, and coordinated labor on a continental scale. The monumental hydraulic mining operations, like those at Las Médulas, fell completely silent. The knowledge of how to survey and build a 60-mile aqueduct for industrial erosion was not just misplaced, it became economically irrelevant in a fractured, localized Europe. No single kingdom or local lord had the resources or the need to literally move a mountain for gold. Similarly, the advanced dewatering machines, the great series of water-lifting wheels described by Roman authors, vanish from the archaeological record. The concept of using water power for more than milling grain seems to have retreated into a theoretical idea, preserved in a few manuscripts but absent from the mines. The deep shaft mining that depended on such technology became too hazardous, and the industry retracted to shallower, safer deposits. This was not a loss of intelligence, but a retreat of ambition forced by a new, decentralized world. The medieval period, then, becomes not a blank space, but a long era of consolidation and slow, regional reinvention. What the Romans had done with state-sponsored genius, medieval miners began to rebuild through guild-driven experimentation. By the 12th and 13th centuries, as population and demand for metals grew again, we see the independent resurgence of sophisticated engineering. The water-powered stamp mill, hinted at in antiquity, emerges in full force in medieval Germany and Bohemia, crushing ore with a mechanical rhythm that announced the return of industrial thinking. The pivotal invention of the medieval period, however, was the crank. This simple addition to the hand-powered windlass revolutionized hoisting. It allowed a single man to operate a winch more efficiently, and its adaptation eventually led to more complex geared systems for draining mines. These were not Roman copies, they were medieval solutions to the same eternal problems, arrived at through a different path of trial and error. The true measure of what was forgotten comes into sharp focus with the Renaissance. When scholars like Georgius Agricola traveled to the mining towns of Saxony in the 1500s to document their practices for his great work, De Re Metallica, they were not merely recording contemporary methods. They were, in many ways, rediscovering a lost classical world. Agricola's detailed woodcuts of ventilation systems, water pumps, and ore dressing floors show techniques that were highly advanced, but his text is filled with references to trying to recover the deeper knowledge of the ancients. The engineers and humanists of the Renaissance looked at the Roman ruins and the fragmented texts and realized there were depths to the past they had not yet plumbed. They saw that the ancients had tackled problems of scale and complexity that mirrored their own growing ambitions. The wheel had turned not back to the beginning, but to a point where society was once again ready to ask the big questions and to rebuild the grand systems. The bridge from antiquity to the early modern world was built from two kinds of timber: the sturdy, continuous planks of everyday craft that never broke, and the newly hewn beams of rediscovered ambition, fitted together across the wide gap of centuries. The true legacy of these forgotten mines is not a list of tools, but a fundamental shift in perspective. We can no longer look at the ancient world and see only the slow grind of primitive labor. What unfolded in those deep galleries was a symphony of engineering, a field as sophisticated in its own context as any modern discipline. The genius was never in a single, shining invention, but in the seamless integration of entire systems. Mechanical ingenuity solved the problem of force, with levers and water wheels multiplying human effort. Hydraulic mastery turned water from a deadly foe into a vital tool for breaking rock, washing ore, and even breathing life into tunnels. A complex social engine organized thousands into a precise, productive machine, while logistical networks of rails, ropes, and maps created order from subterranean chaos. Each system supported the others, and it was this interconnected web that allowed humanity to reach depths and achieve scales that stagger the imagination even today. This history matters because it shatters a comforting myth, the idea of linear progress. We often imagine technology as a straight, rising line from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced. The story of ancient mining reveals a landscape of peaks and valleys. Astonishing heights of integrated engineering were reached, only to be partially lost and then painstakingly rebuilt centuries later when the social and economic conditions were right once more. Progress is not inevitable, it is fragile. It depends on stable societies that can sustain specialized knowledge, on economies that create demand, and on the fragile, living chain of mentorship that passes hard-won wisdom from one generation to the next. When those chains break, knowledge does not just wait in a library to be rediscovered. It evaporates, leaving only silent stones and puzzling ruins. Ultimately, this is a story about a universal human trait, ingenuity in the face of relentless material constraints. With no dynamite, they used fire and water to shatter mountains. Without electric pumps, they designed screws and water staircases to defy floods. Lacking modern sensors, they read the subtle language of plants and colored earth to see deep into the ground. They did not have our resources, but they possessed a profound understanding of the physics and chemistry of their world, and they manipulated those fundamental forces with breathtaking cleverness. Their solutions were elegant, sustainable, and perfectly adapted to their time. So the next time you encounter a historical label like primitive technology or the Dark Ages, pause and reconsider. Look closer. The past is filled with quiet revolutions, with complex systems humming just beneath the surface of what seems simple. The forgotten miners challenge us to ask better questions, to see the intelligence embedded in the soot-blackened walls of a tunnel or the careful slope of a 2,000-year-old aqueduct. Their legacy is an invitation to look at all of history with fresh eyes, to recognize that human ingenuity has always been our most powerful tool, lighting the way forward even from the deepest dark.